Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the hidden dragon leader? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei's battle with Riser is finally here. Hyoudou household, you have got to be kidding me, Issei groaned as Yumi Kiba appeared in his room wearing a pair of yellow pajamas. Issei could tell that Yumi wasn't wearing a bra because her breasts were straining against the shirt and he could see the outline of her nipples. He could appreciate the appearance, but he had to wonder why she was showing up in the middle of the night. What's the meaning of this? Carloman said angrily. The fact that one of Ria's servants was in Issei's room was something Carloman clearly didn't want. That's what I was about to say. Why are you having sex with a member of Riser's peerage, Issei, and for that matter, how do you know a member of Riser's peerage? Yumi said with equal annoyance. This was truly an annoying situation for Issei, but he maintained his cool. Ladies, can we relax for a minute so I can explain what's going, Issei said calmly as he gathered himself dispelling his sacred gear for the moment. Fine, Yumi said with a pout on her face, and she and Carloman both calmed down. As he explained what was going on, there was a mix of confusion and disbelief from both girls as they realized just what a bizarre situation they found themselves in. So let me get this straight. You didn't actually sleep with Lady Gremory, and the makeout session was initiated by Rias in order to get Lord Riser to challenge you directly, since you aren't in her peerage. Carloman said in shock as she lay next to Issei. In other words, her master was completely fooled by Rias and baited into this fight. And Riser, being the scumbag he is, sent Carloman here to kill you so he didn't have to bother with it. When that failed, he panicked believing that you would tell Rias and sent her back to silence you by any means necessary, which in this case meant seduction, since she couldn't beat you in a fight. Yumi deadpanned. As far as she was concerned, it just meant Riser was a coward. Pretty much, Issei shrugged, acknowledging how insane these events are. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't tell Rias about Riser's attempted attack. Yumi growled in annoyance. Her loyalty to Rias and her affection for Issei were telling her to reveal the truth and get rid of Riser for good. Because if you do that, I can use the fact that Lady Gremory lied to put the blame on her. Carloman replied, staring straight at her fellow knight. Just like Yumi, Carloman was slowly falling for Issei, and she would like to see him spared if for no other reason than to try his dick again down the road. She was well aware that if Riser claimed Rias, most of the girls in his current peerage would be tossed aside in favor of Rias and her queen. That's a pretty good one, and another reason is that I want to face Riser myself. Issei smiled, shocking both of the girls. Issei, are you crazy? Even Rias would struggle in a one-on-one battle with Riser. I know you're the Red Dragon Emperor, but that won't be enough. Yumi frowned. Is that so? Issei smiled as he got up from his spot on the bed, revealing his naked form to both girls. Issei put some clothes on. Yumi blushed heavily. You've seen it all before, Yumi. Issei chuckled before snapping his fingers to make a privacy barrier. Why did you make that privacy barrier? Carloman wondered. Issei looked at the naked knight with a smile and simply allowed his aura to roll freely for once. I don't want to wake up the entire block, Issei smiled as his aura was unleashed. Incredible, he may just be able to win, Carloman said in shock. His power was so great that it almost gave her another orgasm, almost. No kidding, Yumi nodded as her body shuddered with excitement, putting her on the verge of coming. Issei was far stronger than Rias, and if this was his base power, there was no telling what he could do when the boosted gear got involved. The smiling Issei simply stood in front of the girls as he suppressed his power again. Any questions? Issei said sarcastically. Yumi looked at the Knight of Riser Phoenix and smiled. Mind if I join? Yumi chuckled. I've got no problem with that, but it's up to Carloman. Issei replied with a smile on his face. Why not? I doubt that she could satisfy this monster of yours. Carloman taunted. She knew that there was no way she could handle Issei alone, but her pride wouldn't allow her to admit as much in front of a fellow knight. We'll see about that. Yumi smiled as she walked up to the bed. Let me guess. You didn't plan this either. Drake chuckled mentally. No. No, I did not, but I'll take it, Issei replied mentally as he enjoyed yet another threesome. In another universe, the two might be competing on the battlefield for their respective masters, but in this one, they were competing for Issei's love and affection. The day of the big battle had arrived, and a smiling Issei was waiting in the Orc for Grafia to arrive and take him to the special battlefield they were setting up. Not that Issei cared. Issei, you're not taking this seriously, Rias pouted as Issei sat on the couch making out with Yumi to pass the time. Issei's outfit for the match consisted of simple red t-shirt and a black tracksuit bottom with a single red stripe on each leg, along with a pair of red sneakers. Issei pulled away from the kiss, showing off an impressive stream of saliva in order to reply. Oh, relax, Rias, I'll be fine, Issei replied before resuming his makeout session. After the wonderful threesome, Carloman and Yumi both agreed to keep his power a secret, which meant that nobody else was aware of what a mismatch this was. Rias is just mad that Yumi is the one making out with you. Akeno teased. That's enough, Yumi. Issei has a battle to win, Rias said with a blush on her face. She didn't exactly deny her queen's words, but her reaction spoke volumes. Fine, Yumi smiled, getting off of Issei at last, much to Ria's relief. That better, Rias, Yumi chuckled. Rias was about to reply when a magic circle appeared in the room. Showtime, Issei grinned, getting up and getting a quick stretch in. As Grafia appeared in the room, a smiling Issei was ready to fight. So are you ready, Mr. Hyoudou? Grafia wondered. Heck yeah, Issei replied happily as he walked over to Grafia. Very well then, Grafia nodded before creating a magic circle that would send Issei to the battlefield. The battlefield chosen was set up like a Roman Colosseum, and as Issei arrived, a smiling Riser stood in the middle with a smile on his face. You actually bothered to show up, boy. I'm shocked, Riser taunted. I'm sure you are shocked, Riser. Though if you don't mind, I'd like very much to get to the battle, Issei said nonchalantly. Taunts like that were useless as far as he was concerned. Very well, Riser nodded, and the two competitors moved to opposite sides of the battlefield. Battle begin, Grafia yelled via loudspeaker, and the showdown began. You're finished, boy. Riser roared before sending a fireball Issei's way. That old trick, you'll have to do way better than that, Issei smiled before easily dodging the attack. You're just a human, so I doubt you can dodge forever. Riser smirked as he launched fireball after fireball at Issei, who easily moved out of the way of the attacks. Is that so, Issei mused, deciding to take the next attack in order to prove a point. Got you, Riser said happily, charging a much larger fireball and sending it at the relaxed Issei, who simply looked at it like he was bored. Dragon shot, Issei replied before sending a small blast of energy towards the fireball. The counterattack easily pierced the ball of flames and nailed a stunned Riser in the stomach. Sure, it was a basic fireball attack, but to see it beaten so easily was shocking. Even those watching were stunned. Orc, incredible, Issei is holding his own. Rias smiled as she watched the battle in the orc with the rest of her peerage. Looks like there's more to Issei than just a pretty face, Akeno replied. This is just the beginning, girls. Issei is just getting started, Yumi thought to herself as she watched the battle unfold. She knew how strong Issei was, and this was just the beginning of what he could do. Battlefield. While Issei's attack didn't do much damage, it did serve to damage Riser's suit, much to his annoyance. You little bastard. I like that suit. Riser cursed as he tossed the suit to the side, leaving him at just his dress shirt. Issei could only chuckle, but it was time to deliver the bad news. Thank you, Riser, all those fireballs made for an excellent warm-up. Issei taunted. What did you say? Riser growled with anger. The idea that his attacks had served as a warm-up was infuriating. Issei smiled before he began to focus his energy at last, and it was time for a real surprise. I said thanks for the warm-up. Now it's time for you to see what I can really do. Balance breaker, Issei roared as a powerful light surrounded him. When the light cleared, Issei's balance breaker was revealed, and even Riser knew what that meant. The Red Dragon Emperor. That's impossible, Riser said in disbelief. That's right, Riser. I am Issei Hyoudou, the Red Dragon Emperor, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Issei smiled happily. Riser gritted his teeth because he was instinctively aware he could no longer win this battle. Tell me, Red Dragon, did Rias know about this? Riser said angrily. Issei smiled before vanishing in a show of incredible speed. No, she didn't, and if it makes you feel better, she doesn't know about your sneak attack either, Issei whispered before slamming Riser in the gut with his fist. Damn you, Riser grunted as he collapsed in a heap from the powerful strike. Oh, I'm not even close to done, Riser, Issei smiled before sending a roundhouse kick at the prone Riser, sending him flying into the walls of the Colosseum. Keeping up the pressure, Issei's arms went forward as he prepared for some fun. Dragonic barrage, Issei roared, sending a series of miniature dragon shots at the prone Riser, each attack hitting their mark. Damn you, you bastard. Riser roared in pain as shot after shot nailed his body perfectly flush. He was helpless to stop the assault, and he knew it. The worst part was that the legendary healing ability of the Phoenix clan was useless because of the constant attacks. Sure, he was healed, but his stamina was getting drained every second as the merciless assault continued. Orc. Over in the orc, 3 of the people in the room were absolutely stunned. Issei is unreal. I can't believe he was this strong the whole time, Rias said in disbelief. When Issei insisted that he didn't need any help, she was skeptical, but clearly he was being serious. Yep, his nickname of the Hidden Dragon was more accurate than anybody could have imagined. Akeno preened, appreciating the sadistic display of attacks that Issei was sending Riser's way. He was practically helpless as the barrage of dragon shots hammered him. Strong Kaneko replied as nonchalantly as she could, however she was clearly impressed because she wasn't eating any sweets. Even Yumi was in awe at the ruthless display. I knew he was strong, but this is insane, Yumi said out loud, instead of just hiding it, which was a big mistake. What do you mean by that, Yumi? Are you telling me you knew Issei was this strong, Rias said in shock. Yumi had the nerve to blush heavily, since this would not end well. That's right, President. Issei showed me how strong he was already, but clearly he was hiding his true power. Yumi admitted. When was this, Rias wondered nervously. Yumi hesitated to answer because she wasn't sure how much to tell Rias. I found out when I convinced him to help us. Yumi replied with a blush on her face. Rias was stunned for a moment, wondering when she could have convinced him, and just as importantly, why she was blushing, until she remembered his conversation with Grafia and her eyes widened in realization. So you, Rias said in shock. Yumi frowned since Rias clearly realized what happened. That's right. I used my body to convince Issei to help us. We had sex in exchange for him helping you with your riser problem. Yumi revealed, shocking Akeno and Kaneko. She still hid what happened with Carloman, since one bombshell was enough. Rias was stunned by the revelation, but in hindsight, it should have been obvious that something intimate happened between the two. Yumi was in the female uniform a lot more recently, and their make-out session before the battle was far too intense for a regular pair of people. Thank you, Yumi. Rias smiled as she walked over to her knight and hugged her tightly. I did what I could, President. Yumi replied with a slight blush, considering she was planning to sleep with Issei anyway after the display at the kendo club. Helping Rias was just a bonus as far as she was concerned. Yufufufu looks like Riser isn't happy. Akeno smiled, interrupting the moment and causing the group to focus on the battlefield again. What Rias and Yumi said in shock as they looked back to the battle to find that Issei's barrage was over and the smoke the blasts created was starting to clear. Battlefield. I'm not done yet, Riser panted as he got up from the attacks. His clothes were shredded, but otherwise his appearance was scar-free due to his healing factor. However, he was exhausted since he was forced to heal so many times. The fact that the onslaught lasted 5 minutes was insane. Issei smiled, lifting up his right hand and motioning with his finger, bring it on. Issei roared with pride. The battle was his to lose and he was going to press his advantage. Damn you, Riser roared as he charged Issei again, aiming to punch him in the face. Oh, it's this again, Issei smiled as he allowed Riser to grab his helmet out of amusement. Riser roared as flames erupted from his fist and surrounded the armored Issei. Riser laughed as the flames surrounded Issei, but his amusement was short-lived when smoke appeared from the middle of the flames. How did it feel to taste victory for even a second, Riser? Shame you forgot that I could clone myself, Issei smiled wickedly from the other side of the arena. You bastard, Riser growled with gritted teeth. A real bastard is you, Riser, but that's another story for another day. Issei smiled as he walked towards the Phoenix Heir before accelerating and slamming him in the gut with his claws out. Bastard. Riser roared as Issei's claws drew blood. Oh, it's only getting worse from here. Fire Pillar, Issei announced as flames appeared from his gauntlet and surrounded the Phoenix from close range. Now it was Riser's turn to be engulfed in flames. Riser roared in pain. Normally flames wouldn't hurt him very much, but thanks to all of the attacks, he was much more vulnerable. That should do it, Issei preened as he pulled his hand away as the flames burned Riser for another minute before fading. The Phoenix Heir had burn marks all over his body and he was clearly exhausted. This isn't over, you little bastard. Riser chuckled as he reached into his pocket and grabbed a small vial. Orc. That's Rias gasped, much to the shock of the rest of the peerage. What is that vial, President? Yumi said nervously. That's a phoenix tear. If Riser takes it he'll be fully healed. Rias frowned. I see, Yumi said bitterly, but she wasn't concerned. I thought you'd be more nervous, Yumi. Akeno snickered. There are 2 reasons I'm not Akeno. One is that despite all of those attacks Issei doesn't even look winded. 2. Issei hasn't used the boosted gear's real power, yet, Yumi replied with a relaxed tone. Rias thought about it and then her eyes widened. The boosted gear was able to double the user's power instantly, but Issei hadn't done that once. Looking at the screen, she also noted that Issei was barely panting despite the various attacks. I see, Rias replied with a savage grin on his face. Battlefield. What's he up to? Issei frowned. He could have easily taken the vial, but he wanted to see what Riser could do to amuse himself. The smiling Riser slowly opened the vial and poured a blue liquid into his mouth. Watching Issei could only fume at his carelessness as Riser began to heal. That's so much better, Riser said happily, his injuries practically gone and his body restored to full strength. How annoying, Issei deadpanned. He wasn't trying to take this seriously and now he would actually have to do so. Ahaha, now I'm back to full power and you've used up far too much energy. This battle is mine, Riser said happily. Quite the opposite, Riser, this just means I get to beat your ass more, Issei replied with a savage grin. Boost X5. No. Riser gasped, completely forgetting about the fact he was facing the Red Dragon Emperor. That's right, Riser. At its base level, I can boost my power every 10 seconds, but my balance breaker makes it so I don't need to worry about any delay. By the way, I've barely used any energy so far and that means I can really kick your ass. Issei smiled before vanishing in a show of speed and appearing in front of Riser again before slamming his fist into Riser's gut. Riser cried out in pain as Issei's attack broke some ribs this time. That sounded beautiful. Let's do it again. Issei smiled before hitting Riser with a series of powerful punches into his stomach. Riser's cries of pain were beautiful for Issei, and the Phoenix heir was helpless to stop Issei's brutal assault. For another 5 minutes, Issei pummeled Riser with a series of powerful punches that would have completely demolished his ribcage, if not for his ability to restore himself each time. When the 5 minutes was over, Issei roundhouse kicked Riser in the stomach once more, sending him flying into the walls of the arena. Thanks to the vicious assault, Riser's stamina was back down to nearly zero, but he wasn't going to give up. "This isn't over," Riser grunted, finally getting to his feet. Boost X10. As the boosted gear sent his strength skyrocketing once again, Issei decided to finish Riser off using his new speed to get inside of Riser's guard in an instant from across the stadium. "It is over, Riser, and you're not getting up this time." Super Dragon Fist, Issei roared, sending a final fist into Riser's gut, smashing his ribcage entirely and sending him into the air as a massive amount of blood poured from his mouth. However, Issei wasn't finished and he raised his hand into the air, taking aim like a skeet shooter. "Nice knowing you, Riser." Dragon shot. Issei smiled, sending a decisive blast Riser's way. The attack hit with a sickening thud, and the explosion that followed was equally as impressive. The crowd watched as Riser Phoenix hit the ground with a thud, and this time he wasn't getting up. Oh, he was alive, but he wasn't getting up this time. "Winner. Issei Hyoudou," Grafia announced, putting an end to the battle. Issei dispelled his balance breaker and appeared in his normal state. "That was fun." Issei smiled, still calm despite the incredible display of power. Issei was barely back in the clubroom for a second before he had to reach out his arms to catch Yumi in an emphatic embrace. "That was amazing," Issei, Yumi said happily as she nuzzled her head against his chest. "Thanks. That was a fun battle to be sure." Issei smiled as he looked towards Rias, who simply looked at the young man in disbelief. "Thank you for your help, Issei. I know you and Yumi made an arrangement, but you still deserve a payment. You have a single favor to be used at your leisure," Rias said calmly. True, it was a contract, but Rias refused to allow her knight to sacrifice herself further. "That's fine. Now, if you don't mind, I want to go home." Issei smiled as he prepared to leave the room. Or at least he would have if another magic circle didn't appear in the room. "What's going on? Why is the Phoenix clan here?" Rias said nervously, since the circle belonged to the Phoenix clan. Much to Issei's amusement, 2 people appeared out of the circle. The first was Carloman, and the second was a young woman with white skin, dark blue eyes, and blonde hair that was in twintails shaped like drills. She was wearing a long pink dress with white frills and a magenta bow that looked pretty cute as far as Issei was concerned. What Issei wasn't aware of was that the girl was Riser's sister Ravel. "Hello there, Rias, if you don't mind, I'd like to have a chat with you and the Red Dragon Emperor," the Ravel said calmly. Issei smiled since things were about to get very interesting. "Very well," Issei smiled. "Akeno, can you get our new guest some tea?" Rias said with a hint of annoyance. Something stunk about this and she didn't like it. "Some for me too, actually," Issei spoke up. "Very well," Akeno smiled as she went to get the tea. Rias sat down at her desk with Akeno, Yumi and Kaneko flanking her, while Issei sat on a chair with a blonde girl and Carloman on the couch. Now that everybody had their drinks, it was time to talk. "So what's going on, Ravel? I thought my business with your clan was done." Rias scowled. "I would have thought so too, considering the Red Dragon Emperor crushed my brother. However, I was made aware of something by Carloman that I simply had to address." Ravel frowned as she turned towards a blushing Carloman. "Carloman, you bitch, you actually told her?" Yumi said angrily, to the shock of Rias and Ravel. "Care to explain, Yumi?" Rias said angrily before Carloman could respond. "Actually, you can leave that to me." Issei smiled, finally speaking up. "The floor is yours, Red Dragon." Ravel said calmly. "Thank you, Lady Phoenix, and may I say that I'm surprised a loser like Riser has a pretty sister like you." Issei smiled, causing Rias, Yumi and Carloman to twitch something fierce. "Thank you," Ravel smiled back. "Issei, what's going on?" Rias said angrily, wanting to get to the bottom of this. "After our initial meeting, Riser sent Carloman over there to try and kill me. He believed that if he did that he wouldn't have to deal with the unnecessary drama of a proper battle." Issei explained as though it wasn't a big deal. "What?" Rias exclaimed. "That's right. Carloman failed to kill the Red Dragon, and when my brother realized that he was trapped, he sent Carloman to seduce him, hoping that he would keep what happened between them a secret. However, my brother's plan backfired," Ravel revealed with a smirk that caused Carloman to blush in embarrassment. Issei Rias twitched heavily. In other words, Carloman attempted to seduce Issei, and he turned the tables on her. Based on her reaction, Yumi likely walked in on them having sex and thus learned about the deception. "At any rate, my family was not pleased to learn about my brother's cowardice." Ravel frowned, remembering the annoyance that she and her family felt when they learned the truth a few days ago. "I see, so what does that have to do with me?" Rias wondered. "In addition to the marriage between you and my brother being annulled, we wanted to give you Carloman as your newest knight as a peace offering and as a means of punishing Riser for putting his knight in danger over a petty struggle. Her experience in raiding games and her strength would be valuable to you." Ravel explained calmly. Say what? Yumi said in disbelief. The idea of another rival was infuriating, particularly since this one was part of the supernatural. And this had nothing to do with Carloman's affections for Issei. Rias said with a raised eyebrow. Maybe it does, but does that matter? Ravel smirked. Rias groaned in annoyance, but she knew that she would benefit as much as Issei. Very well. I welcome you to my peerage, Carloman. Rias smiled. Thank you, Lady Gremory. I look forward to working with you. Carloman smiled. If that's all, ladies. I'd like to get going. It's been a long day and I'm sure you have a lot of devil business to handle. Issei smiled. Hold on. You're not one of Ria's servants. Ravel said in shock, having been unaware of the truth at all. Not at all. I helped Rias as a favor. Issei smiled before leaving the room. Ravel was stunned by the news and couldn't help but smile, since she realized that Rias had played her family like a fiddle. Well, this was interesting. Ravel said, happily deciding to hide the truth about Ria's deception. She liked Rias, and as far as she was concerned, her brother didn't deserve her at all. Yes, it was. Now how about we get started on switching her over, Rias said calmly, hoping to change the subject as quickly as possible. She could overlook everything that happened for the moment since her riser problem was solved and she was getting a new knight. 2 weeks have passed since Carloman's addition to the Gremory family and Issei's good fortune only grew. Carloman was now a member of his class and her addition and her public displays of affection for Issei made an already crazy situation more so. A week ago, Murayama and Cadis asked Issei to become the manager for the Kendo club since he wasn't a part of the orc, in the hopes that it would monopolize his attention or come close to doing so. Issei naturally accepted, and now his after-school time was spent mostly at the Kendo club, enjoying the delicious bodies of the Kendo club girls and on a few occasions Yumi, who had begun wearing the female uniform full-time. Life is good, Issei smiled as he sat in his room alone for a rare occasion since the Gremory peerage had a stray devil hunt to deal with. While the Kendo club took care of his needs during the day, Yumi and Carloman took care of them at night. Yes. The hunt has gone well for you, partner. Drake replied with pride in his voice. Yes it has, Drake, yes it has. Issei smiled happily at his recent run of success. All of a sudden, his phone rang, much to his shock. Issei quickly pulled his phone off the charger, and when he noticed the number he was in shock. It can't be, Issei said in disbelief. The phone number was from an England area code and that meant only one person could be calling him. Putting the phone to his ear, Issei waited with bated breath for the person on the other side to speak, not even worrying about how that person got his number. Hello Issei, is now a bad time? Irina Hyoudou said with a bubbly voice. Sort of, but I'll make an exception for you, Issei replied with a big smile on his face. Irina lived in England, so he was 8 hours ahead of her, but this was Irina and he didn't mind the late night call. Good, because I have a favor to ask you, Irina said nervously. Of course, Issei replied. As you already know, I'm an exorcist with the church and something has happened with the church that requires me to be in Kuoh in 3 days. I need you to arrange a meeting with the devils in the area for me. Irina revealed. Issei was surprised to hear that, but again the answer was obvious. No problem. I'll set it up tomorrow, Issei replied without hesitation. If Irina was asking him for a favor, he would do it, no questions asked. Thanks. Oh, and I'll need a place to stay, so do you mind if me and my friend stay with you guys? We'll arrive in 2 days. Irina requested yet again. Issei hesitated slightly on that since the Yumi and Carloman wouldn't be happy, but again this was Irina, so the answer was obvious, sure. I'll tell my parents to get the guest room ready, Issei smiled. Thanks Issei, I'll see you soon. Irina replied before hanging up the phone. Well, this just got interesting, Issei smiled as he went to sleep thinking about his oldest friend and their upcoming reunion. Unknown location. I hope you know what you're doing, Irina. A female voice said as it looked towards the figure of Irina Hyoudou. This young woman was medium height with blue hair that had a twinge of green and dark yellow eyes. She was wearing a black skin-tight short-sleeved leotard with pauldrons, matching fingerless gloves that extend to her biceps, and thigh-high boots, all of which are adored with straps all over it. We'll be fine, Zenovia. Issei's my friend, and he agreed without asking any questions. Irina replied as she put her phone back at her desk. Like Zenovia, Irina was medium height, but she had long chestnut hair that was tied in twintails by a pair of blue scrunchie. She was wearing the same attire as Zenovia, which rather ironically was the exorcist battlesuit. I hope so, Irina. This is an important mission and we can't screw it up, Zenovia replied as she looked at her partner with a nervous gaze. When Irina told her that she knew somebody who could help them, Zenovia was skeptical, but things appeared to be going in their favor. I know, Zenovia, believe me, that's why I'm reaching out to Issei. Irina replied. Her upcoming mission was dangerous and they needed any ally they could get. The next day Issei made his way over to the orc after class in order to talk with Rias. Because he typically headed to the Kendo club after class, Carloman had reluctantly taken to walking with Yumi and Asia, who were in a different homeroom, which bought him some time. Admittedly, Rias was surprised to see Issei show up. "Hello Issei, Yumi and Carloman haven't arrived yet," Rias said calmly. "That's fine since I wanted to speak with you about a business matter and they would just complicate things," Issei replied. He knew Rias was bitter about his relationship with her knights, but he didn't care since this was business. "I see, so what happened?" Rias said as her eyes turned more focused. "In 2 days a pair of exorcists will be coming to Kuoh Academy with the intention of speaking to you. I don't know what it's about, but what I do know is that something has happened with the church that requires them to be in Kuoh. All I need you to do is when they arrive to speak with them and hear them out peacefully," Issei explained. Ria's eyes widened since this was a big deal. "Alright, but do you mind if I ask how you were told about this?" Rias wondered. "Not at all. One of the exorcists is my childhood friend," Issei shrugged. Rias was surprised to learn about that, and a question immediately came to the forefront of her mind. "Does she know that I'm the Red Dragon Emperor?" "Yes. She and I trained together when we were kids, which is one of the reasons I'm so powerful," Issei replied frankly. "I see," Rias said with a raised eyebrow. "Well, I have to go to kendo practice. See you around." Rias Issei smiled as he left the room calmly in order to go attend to his duties as the kendo club manager, knowing that it was the only peace he was going to get for some time. Whatever was bringing Irina to Kuoh had to be major, and that meant that he would be involved in another mess in due time. To say Yumi Kiba was having a bad day would be the understatement of the century. When she arrived at the Orc with Carloman in Asia, Rias sat her down and delivered Issei's message about the exorcist's arrival in 2 days. Well, that was irritating. The news that one of the exorcists was Issei's childhood friend was even worse. Unlike Rias and Carloman, Yumi knew that the source of his swordsman fetish was a childhood friend, and Kiba was certain that she was the one about to arrive. After dealing with her contract, Yumi made her way to her apartment in the pouring rain. "Oh, look what we have here, a little devil girl all on her own." A very familiar and unpleasant voice cackled, adding to her already bad mood. "What hole did you crawl out of, Fried? I'm really not in the mood to deal with you right now." Yumi scowled in annoyance. Fried Selzen was a rogue exorcist to Yumi, and the group had the unpleasant pleasure of encountering during the situation with Rainer. He had short white hair and beady red eyes. His outfit consisted of a long blue overcoat with trim that consisted of a series of semicircles with a gold dot in the middle, over a white dress shirt and white pants with black shoes. "I had to take a little break from devil killing, but I'm back and I brought a new friend with me." Fried smiled before revealing his blade, and one that caused Yumi's annoyance to grow into pure rage. The blade was like a long kris, an asymmetrical dagger with alternating blade patterns. "Where did you get that blade?" Yumi roared with fury. "Oh, you mean my little Excalibur here? It was given to me by a friend." Fried cackled. "Well, whoever that friend is, you'll have to apologize to them when I destroy that blade." Yumi roared with fury as she summoned a blade of her own to defend herself. It was a long black broadsword with a golden hilt. Despite the various blades she used with sword birth, this was her main blade, Holy Eraser, and as the name suggests, it does a particularly good job of destroying holy swords. "Bring it on." Fried cackled as he tried to charge. Yumi and Fried clashed blades a few times, but Yumi scowled when she realized that the blade in front of her was holding strong. "I'll destroy that blade if it's the last thing I do." Yumi scowled before charging again just to have a figure interrupt their battle. "Need a little help?" Yumi Carloman smiled as she appeared in front of her new teammate with her own blade ready to go. "Oh goody, I get 2 devils for the price of 1, and this new one is feisty." Fried cackled. "Get out of here, Carloman, this is my fight." Yumi yelled angrily. "I'm not leaving you to fight him alone. We're teammates, so I've got your back," Carloman said firmly. "Bring it, girls." Fried cackled before a green magic circle appeared in his ear, causing him to frown. "Sorry ladies, I gotta go," Fried said all of a sudden before throwing a flash bomb, forcing the 2 girls to block the light on the rainy day. "Damn it." Yumi cursed, much to Carloman's shock as she dropped her blade and fell to the ground, tears falling down her face. "What's going on, Yumi?" Cowrner said, nervously wrapping her arms around the crying girl. When Yumi didn't respond, she realized that there was only one person who could help her. "I know what you said, Issei, but Yumi needs you right now," Carloman thought to herself as she prepped a teleportation circle. Issei Hyoudou relaxed as he sat in his room thinking about the impending arrival of his childhood friend. His day was bittersweet, considering he had to tell Murayama and Cadis that they couldn't come see him for the next few days because his childhood friend was in town. According to Irina, she would arrive in Kuoh tomorrow around lunchtime, and her mother already said that she'd meet her and her friend at the airport, which meant she'd be at the house when he returned from club activities. "Irina, it's been a long time," Issei said happily as he closed his eyes in order to relax and reminisce about the person who first sent him down his path of deviance. Flashback: the 6-year-old Issei Hyoudou sat in the living room of his neighbor's house with his childhood friend and neighbor Irina Hyoudou next to him and smiling. Irina was very tomboyish as a child, and if Irina hadn't told him otherwise, he would have assumed she was a guy. Right now they were waiting for her father, who said that he had an important discussion for the two of them. "So Issei, what do you think my dad wants to talk to us about?" Irina wondered. "Don't know, Irie, but he seemed serious." Issei replied calmly. A moment later Irina's father walked into the room, but he was wearing robes like the ones the priest at the local church would wear. "Listen kids, what I'm about to tell you is incredibly important and you can't tell any of the other kids at school." Irina's father Tauji said with a stern expression on his face. "What about mom and dad?" Issei wondered. "Your parents already know," Tauji revealed. Issei and Irina looked at each other before smiling. "Okay," the pair replied, and Irina's father began to speak. Irina's father revealed that the many business trips he was on were actually missions for the church and that he was a real exorcist. The blade that he kept in the family room was actually his weapon, which stunned Issei and Irina since they played with it all the time, safely of course. In addition, Tauji told Issei about his sacred gear and explained the supernatural and Issei's connection to them. He planned to move to England with Irina in order for her to become an exorcist, but that he would wait until they finished elementary school, and he wanted Issei to be able to protect himself once he was gone. Issei understood and agreed to begin his training, and a smiling Irina asked to join them so she could get a head start. Irina was smart enough to know that she would be behind the other kids without it, and she wanted to prove herself the moment she arrived. Tauji naturally agreed and the fun began. "That was fun," Issei. Irina smiled happily as their latest training session came to an end. It had been a year since they learned the truth, and afterwards Irina and Issei would train together every 2 weeks. His sacred gear, the boosted gear, finally woke up at the end of the last session, and this was their first time sparring with Issei using the boosts. "Yeah, it's time to shower, huh?" Issei said calmly. What Irina wasn't aware of was that thanks to his sacred gear, Issei's hormones were on fire, causing very interesting feelings to appear in the 7-year-old Issei. "Yeah, so I'll see you later." Irina smiled happily. Without even thinking, he walked over to Irina and kissed her on the cheek. "Bye Irina. I can't wait for the next training session," Issei said with a smile that seemed foreign for the young man. As Issei walked away, Irina could only stare with a blush on her face as she realized what she and Issei had done. "Well, this is interesting," Tauji thought to himself. He was no fool and his daughter had feelings for the young man. From that point on, every one of the training session would end with a kiss between the two. 6 months later, they moved on to kisses on the lips, and before long, they were making out in a way that would make regular teenagers blush, despite neither being 8 years old. The two never went further than that, but Issei certainly wanted to, and as the years went on their strength had improved and Issei and Irina were practically inseparable. Unfortunately for the two, the time had finally arrived for Irina to move to England, and Issei and Irina had one last training session the day before they moved. As had become habit, Issei wrapped his arms around Irina's waist, but instead of kissing her he leaned into her ear and whispered, "I'll be thinking of you always, Irina, and I hope the day comes that I can make you mine for real." Irina smiled back and said, "Fine, but you'll have to earn it, Issei. Conquer me in battle and then you can make me yours." Irina wasn't the only one who wanted to escalate things, but they were still kids, and although their mind was willing, their bodies weren't ready for it, and they both knew it. With any luck, the next time they met their bodies would be ready, and both would keep the feelings they had for each other. Flashback end. "I wonder what she looks like now," Issei smiled as he thought of his friend with a small boner forming. Unfortunately, fate had other ideas and a magic circle appeared in his room. From the looks of it, the circle belonged to Rias and group, which meant something had happened. "This can't be good," Drake said ominously. "Yeah," Issei replied, and it was confirmed when Yumi and Carloman appeared in front of him. Both girls were soaking wet and Yumi was clearly upset about something. Yumi looked up and noticed the young man and jumped onto the bed. "Issei," Yumi cried out despite being soaking wet. "What happened, Yumi?" Issei said nervously. Yumi was never this emotional, and that meant something major happened. "She had a long night and could use a friend," Carloman replied. Issei didn't say anything else, but simply wrapped his arms around Yumi, willing his boner away for the moment and hoping everything else would take care of itself. There, just cry for now. You can tell me what's going on after you're done," Issei said calmly. "I'll leave this to you," Carloman said with a smile on her face. "Got it," Issei replied as he held a tearful Yumi close while Carloman left the two to chat. It took around 10 minutes for Yumi to stop crying, and when the tears were finally over, Yumi realized that she was on top of Issei while being soaking wet. "Sorry about that. Let me get up for a second to get changed," Yumi said bashfully, forcing herself off Issei so she could get out of her wet clothes. "You're just fine. So tell me what happened." Issei shrugged as he took the chance to get out of his own wet clothes, changing into a pair of boxers before getting back on the bed. Yumi soon followed, snuggling into the right side Issei's body in an ice blue bra and panty set. Issei's warmth helped Yumi to calm down, particularly since the conversation to come would be difficult, but she had to do it since Issei was already aware that something happened. "Have you ever wondered why I always wore a male uniform, Issei? Well, before you got involved." Yes, I have, especially when you have a body like this, Issei teased, taking the moment to grope Yumi's breasts. I'm serious, Issei, Yumi replied with a slight pout, resisting the urge to moan. She liked what he was doing, but this was business time. Fine, Issei smiled, settling for simply wrapping his arm around the blonde once again. The pout on her face turned to a frown as Yumi recalled the worst moments of her life. Before I met Rias, I was one of 100 children selected for a project sponsored by the church, known as the Holy Sword Project. Yumi revealed, catching Issei off guard. Issei was slightly shocked about the news. So you were actually an exorcist in training? Issei said in slight disbelief. That's right. The Holy Sword Project was supposed to teach me and the other children how to use the Holy Sword Excalibur, and I was thrilled to be given the chance to serve God and to use a legendary holy sword. Yumi revealed, shuddering slightly when she mentioned God's name. You say supposed to, but yet you're here with Rias. What happened? Issei said, nervously, making sure to hold Yumi tight because he could tell they were getting to the crux of the story. Yumi gathered herself, since this was the hardest part for her. For a long time it was difficult, but I endured the harsh experiments. Until we outlived our usefulness, Yumi said coldly. No, Issei replied, having a good idea of what was to come. Yumi fought back tears since she had to tell Issei the truth. That's right. They gathered us all in one room, and one by one, all of my friends were slaughtered by the people who had experimented on us. The only reason I'm even alive today is because my twin brother sacrificed himself to allow me to escape. I ran as far as I could, praying that somebody would save me before Rias ultimately found me. Yumi cried out with tears falling down her face. Issei had no response but to hold her tightly and comfort her. I see. You wore the male uniform so your brother could experience life even for a little bit. Yumi was on the verge of tears again since Issei's words hit the mark perfectly. That's right. I hated myself for being the only survivor, and I hated Excalibur. Yumi cried out. That's enough, Yumi. You don't have to say any more, Issei replied, calmly, stopping her from saying any more. He could only imagine how much pain Yumi was in. Thank you for hearing my story, Issei. Yumi said bashfully as the tears stopped flowing. Of course, Issei said calmly before leaning over and kissing her on the cheek. Thanks, Yumi replied with a blush before snuggling deeper into Issei's body. She was well aware that Issei's boner was throbbing beneath her body as they spoke, but also aware that Issei wasn't going to act on it yet. Despite the odd way their relationship started, the fact that Issei could put sex aside for her was worth a lot. School went by fairly quickly for Issei since he knew that Irina would be waiting for him when he returned, and once the bell rang, he went straight home, much to the annoyance of Murayama and Katis. Unfortunately for Issei, any excitement he may have had for Irina's arrival vanished due to Yumi's story and the cold reality of why she was visiting. Irina's father Taoji told him about the various holy swords during their training, and Excalibur was one that always fascinated Issei because of the fact it was so powerful that it had to be split into 7 fragments in order to prevent King Arthur's enemies from using it. It was obvious that somebody attacked Yumi with a fragment of the blade before she made her impromptu visit with Carloman. Greg, how much do you want to bet that whatever business Irina has involves the fragments of the Excalibur? Issei asked mentally as he made his way home. That isn't much of a bet, partner, Drake replied, aware of the same thing. Issei and Drake were silent until they arrived at Issei's house at last. Here we go, Issei said calmly, opening the door. His senses picked up 3 figures sitting in the living room along with 2 powerful holy auras, and Issei's feeling of dread only grew as he arrived in the room to find his mother sitting with a blue-haired girl and his very grown-up childhood friend. Hey Issei. Long time no see, Irina said, happily getting up from her spot on the living room couch and walking over to Issei. Irina and her partner were wearing a long white robe that covered their bodies and the church's battle suit underneath, but Issei couldn't see the latter. His mother Issei Hyoudou was sitting across from them with a smile on his face. It's been a long time, Irina, Issei said with a weak smile as he and his childhood friend shared a hug for the first time in a long time. Irina had become far more beautiful than Issei could have ever imagined, and a part of him was drooling with excitement. The problem was that another part of him was focused on the holy aura he sensed earlier in Yumi's story. So this is your childhood friend, Irina? He doesn't seem like much. Her partner said bluntly. Be nice, Zenovia. Irina pouted as she continued to enjoy her childhood friend's warmth. Very well, Zenovia replied with a frown. Issei had to admit the partner was cute, but again his focus was on other places. Let me put my stuff away and I'll be back in a second. Issei said calmly before pulling away from Irina's hug. No problem, dear. Mickey said calmly, and Issei made his way up to his room to put his things away. What he didn't see was the frown on Irina's face as he left. Putting his stuff away didn't take long, but as Issei turned to go back downstairs, he was met by the frowning face of his childhood friend. Issei internally cursed because he was so distracted that he didn't notice her following him. That was a pretty weak hello, considering I haven't seen you in 6 years, Issei. Irina frowned. Sorry about that. I had a lot on my mind. Issei replied bashfully. Then make up for it right now. Irina smiled as she walked over to Issei and wrapped her arms around his waist just as they had so many times before. Alright, Issei replied, knowing what his childhood friend wanted. Issei then kissed Irina on the lips as he had many times before, but since it had been 6 years it was very special. It was a simple kiss at first, but Issei slid his tongue towards Irina's lips, which quickly parted to allow him access to her mouth, with Issei doing the same for Irina. The clash of tongues that followed was fearsome, and the two parties fought for dominance for almost 3 minutes before Irina finally pulled away with an impressive trail of saliva, showing the results of their battle. That's more like it. Irina smiled. Yeah, Issei replied with a smile. Murayama may have been the one to reignite his passion for swordswomen, and Yumi only intensified it, but there was no comparing either of them to Irina. She was his ultimate treasure. Let's get back to the others. I'm sure Zenovia is being a worrywart. Irina chuckled. Fine with me, but we're finishing this conversation in my bed tonight. Why, Issei, I thought we agreed we wouldn't go that far until you beat me in a proper spar. Irina replied with a teasing smile. We can just cuddle for now. You don't mind being naked, do you? Issei replied smoothly. We'll see, Irina replied with a smile on her face as the two made their way back down to the others. Irina was nervous about the upcoming mission, and having Issei with her would certainly calm her down, but the tough part began the next day. Irina POV. After a simple dinner, Zenovia and I went back to the guest room in order to relax for a little bit. Tomorrow would be the meeting with the devils, and I was nervous because of how it would affect our mission. Are you ready, Zenovia? I asked my partner, referring to the meeting tomorrow. Yes, I am. We're doing this for the sake of God, and although our opponents are dangerous, we will endure. Zenovia said calmly. Yes, I suppose, I replied nervously. By the way, why aren't you with your childhood friend right now? I know you've been looking forward to this for a while, Irina. Zenovia said with a wry smile. What are you talking about, Zenovia? I replied with a slight blush. I may have terrible sleeping habits, but you talk in your sleep a lot. Zenovia revealed, causing me to blush heavily. The church may praise purity and all of that stuff, but the truth is most of the girls in training were horny sluts. In our platoon of 20 men and women, Zenovia and I were the only ones who were still virgins, and not because we weren't attractive, since multiple guys had attempted to go after us and been turned away for various reasons. Zenovia turned them down because she claimed she hadn't found anybody strong enough in me because I was saving myself for Issei. I see. I said bashfully, aware I likely mentioned Issei in my sleep a few times. Well, I don't mind. There is a chance we might die, and if you wish to sleep with him beforehand I wouldn't stop you. Zenovia replied. Issei and I have an arrangement for that. I replied with a hint of annoyance. That's fine. Though I am curious, why him? As you said, he isn't a devil, but he clearly isn't human based on his aura. Zenovia replied calmly. I frowned since I wanted to keep this a secret for as long as possible. Issei is the Red Dragon Emperor, and a powerful one at that. He and I used to train together when I was in Japan, and I know if he's kept up his training he's incredibly strong. Irina revealed. I see. Well, why not tell him about the mission? Zenovia replied with a question. I have my reasons, I insisted. Alright, Zenovia replied calmly. As we made our way to Kuoh Academy the next day, I was extremely nervous since I had no idea about what was coming and what to expect from the devils in the area, since Issei didn't tell us much. When we arrived at the entrance of the school, I noticed a young woman in Kuoh's uniform with a black bob cut and glasses. So you're the exorcists that are meeting with Rias? The young woman said calmly. Yes, and who are you? I replied with respect, aware that this young woman was a devil and from the aura she was putting out a powerful one. My name is Sona Citri. I'm the student council president of this school and future head of the Citri clan. I'll be escorting you to Rias. The young woman said calmly. Thank you very much. I replied, nodding to my partner. As we walked through the campus I found that the school seemed nice with the various sports clubs and people. A part of me was curious why Issei wasn't the one greeting us, but I was relieved since we could hide the truth from him for now. Sona led us to a clearly older building and after walking up a few floors stopped at a room. Rias is waiting inside. Sona said calmly. Thank you, I said politely before walking into the room. When I arrived at the room I was curious what the Grimoire heiress was like and immediately spotted a beautiful young woman with long red hair who was around my age if not a bit older, which caught me off guard. So you two are the members of the church that Issei mentioned. The redhead said with a businesslike smile. This was the legendary little sister of Mao Lucifer, Rias Grimoire, and I could tell she was arrogant just by looking at her. Yes, we are. I am Irina Hyoudou, and this is my partner Zenovia Kuoh. I said politely before bowing. I am Rias Grimoire and this is my peerage. Rias said calmly as she motioned to the other girls in the room. I immediately noticed that the black-haired girl was a fallen angel and the white-haired girl was a Nekomata, but when I noticed the two blondes I was barely able to contain myself. One was the witch Asia Argento, but the other girl was glaring back at me and if I didn't know any better sizing me up. I had a feeling that if something were to happen it would involve those two women, but I hope not. Yufufufu, shouldn't we wait for Issei to arrive? The black-haired girl teased, catching me off guard. Akeno, this has nothing to do with Issei. This is devil business, and Issei is decidedly human. Rias replied, much to my relief. I didn't want Issei involved with this if I could help it. Alright, the now named Akeno chuckled. Anyway, let's get back to business, I said calmly. I'm here because a few weeks ago, a party consisting of rogue exorcists and fallen angels broke into Orthodox, Protestant, and Roman Catholic churches and stole objects that were very important to the church. The church managed to trace the thieves to Kuoh and sent us believing that the ones responsible for the theft are in this town. I said calmly. I hope you don't believe we are responsible for such a thing. Rias replied with very clear annoyance in her voice. We do not believe you were directly involved. Since you're the sister of Amayu, we would hope that you wouldn't engage in such activities. What we do believe is that whoever the thief is, he intends to use what was stolen in this town. I said diplomatically, keeping a few critical details to myself. Rias was clearly annoyed, but she kept her calm and stared at me with a cold glance. If you don't mind my asking what was stolen. I twitched big time since this was one of the details I didn't want known. The thieves stole 3 fragments of the holy sword Excalibur. My partner and I are holding 2 more, and a 6th one in the church's possession is in a separate facility. I admitted. Ria's eye widened before turning to the blonde that was giving me the stink eye before turning back. If I remember correctly, there are 7 fragments. Where is the last one? Ria said calmly. She was very smart to ask that actually. It's in the possession of the Pendragon family of knights in Europe. I can assure you that it's safe. I replied. Rias looked at me calmly before speaking again. Well, Ms. Irina, Zenovia, I can assure you that we were not involved and we would very much like to find out what culprit is acting amok in my city. Rias said arrogantly. I twitched heavily at Rias referring to Kuoh as her city, but I stayed focused on the task at hand. That will not be necessary. We just wanted to make sure you didn't interfere in our investigation. I replied. Rias was clearly annoyed but stayed calm. Very well then. I thank you for speaking to us. Rias replied diplomatically. President, we shouldn't let them leave so easily. This is a chance to destroy a disgusting holy sword that those two shouldn't be able to use. The short-haired blonde said angrily. What's that supposed to mean? Zenovia replied angrily. Sure enough, the blonde was going to start something. Oh, so you're going to deny the existence of the Holy Sword Project now? The girl said, much to my shock. That's quite the peerage you have, Ms. Gremory, the witch Asia Argento, a fallen angel, and a survivor of the Holy Sword Project. Perhaps my superiors were right to be nervous. Zenovia said bluntly, causing me to twitch more. What was that? A girl with short light brown hair interrupted, escalating things even further. Yufufufu, you're a bold one. The fallen angel in question said angrily. Just great, I lost control of this whole mess. Enough, Ria said angrily, her power radiating, seemingly stopping things in their tracks. Sorry, President Akeno said bashfully. Well, I'm not. I think you need to learn a lesson in respect. The short-haired blonde said angrily. Fine with me. Let's take it outside, Zenovia countered. Good grief, I was afraid of this. When Zenovia gets started, it's nearly impossible to stop her. But grief. Rias groaned, and I agreed with her, knowing that letting this happen was the smartest thing we could do. Our group walked to the side of the old building into a small clearing that would do nicely for our attacks. I'm assuming this will be fine, Rias said calmly. Yes, it will, Zenovia replied. This is all you, Zenovia. I don't want any part of it, I said firmly. That's fine. The blonde replied. Things were about to get very ugly. Actually no, it's not, a new voice said angrily. All of a sudden Issei appeared in the middle of the clearing, and he was not pleased if the look on his face was any indication. Issei, what are you doing here? The short-haired blonde said nervously. All of her anger appeared to be gone, and it was replaced by nerves. What's going on here? Issei walked over to the short-haired girl and put his fingers on her chin, an action she easily accepted. Actually, I'm just a clone, but the boss sent me to watch over you guys and make sure nothing stupid happened. Clearly he was right to be worried. Issei replied with a look of annoyance on his face. I see, the girl said bashfully, turning away from Issei. Yeah, something is off. If you don't mind, Red Dragon Emperor, we were about to fight. Zenovia said bluntly, catching me off guard. Issei pulled his hand off of the girl before walking over to Zenovia calmly. Actually, Zenovia, I do mind. You see, I'm rather fond of Yumi here, and I know her emotions are running on high because of what happened to her recently. What happened? I asked nervously. Oh, this can't be good. A few nights ago she was attacked by a rogue exorcist named Fried Selzen. He was holding a fragment of Excalibur just like you and Zenovia are now, and that triggered some rather nasty trauma for her. What? I exclaimed, since Fried was a big problem. Well, that has nothing to do with me. My job is to deal with heretics and OOMPF. Zenovia never finished what she was saying because Issei slammed her in the gut with a vicious punch that knocked her out cold in one shot. We have a lot to discuss when the real me gets home, but for now it's time to go. Issei's clone said before grabbing Zenovia and tossing her over his back. Right, I said bashfully, grabbing Zenovia's blade and walking over to Issei. Issei, the now named Yumi, said bashfully. I'm sure the boss will have plenty to say to you later as well. Same goes for you, Rias, the clone said coldly before taking me and Zenovia back to his house via a teleportation circle. What a day we've had. Kuoh Academy. As Issei made his way to the entrance of Kuoh Academy, he couldn't help but wonder how things played out at the Orc. Issei had one of his clones watch the meeting between the Orc and the two exorcists, and one of two things was to occur. If it went off without a hitch, the clone was supposed to take Irina and Zenovia to the entrance of the school and have them wait for him. If something did happen, the clone's job was to solve the situation as it saw fit and then take the girls home. When the gates to Kuoh finally appeared, Issei was disappointed for two reasons. The first was that Zenovia and Irina were not there, which meant that something happened, and to make the situation more annoying, Sona Citri was waiting for him. This can't be good, Issei thought to himself as he walked by the president, hoping she was just being her usual nosy self. Mr. Hyoudou, may I have word with you? Sona said calmly. Can't this wait until tomorrow? I've got stuff to do. Issei replied, hoping to just get rid of her. If by stuff to do you mean go see your exorcist childhood friend, then I'm sure she'll be fine. Sona said with an icy expression on her face. Issei cursed internally since it all but confirmed something happened, that's right. I'm curious how the meeting with Rias and the Orc went, Issei replied with an equally icy expression. I can tell you that if you'd like. Sona said with a smile on her face. I'll pass, I trust Irina to tell me what's going on. Issei said calmly. Suit yourself, but you know that the supernatural world is filled with deception. Sona smiled. I'm aware, Issei deadpanned before leaving. To say that Issei Hyoudou was annoyed was the understatement of the year. He arrived home to find that Zenovia was unconscious on his couch and Irina was sitting with her. After sharing a glance with his childhood friend, Issei walked up to his room and waited for Irina to come see him, but she never did. Even as they ate dinner, Irina was silent while Zenovia glared angrily at him. Clearly whatever happened involved him and Zenovia, but Irina was silent on the matter. Since nobody was going to bring it up, Issei let it be. After dinner, Issei went up to his room to play Smash Brothers, but he sensed the two girls leaving the house, and his annoyance only grew. Unlike Yumi, Irina, well aware of how powerful he was and the fact she didn't talk to him, meant one of two things. Either the mission was so simple that she didn't need his power, or the mission was so dangerous that he would be in danger as well. The chances of the first were practically minimal, since Irina wouldn't have needed a meeting with Rias otherwise. She would have simply showed up, taken care of her mission and gone. You're being surprisingly patient with your childhood friend. She's clearly hiding her mission from you. Drake wondered. Yes, she is. The fact my clone brought them home was the first red flag, and Irina's silence was the second. Issei replied. So are you going to confront her about it? Drake wondered. No need, Issei smiled as he relaxed in his room. Why not? Drake questioned. Because Issei started to say before a magic circle appeared in his room. Much to his amusement, it was the Gremory crest. Because of that, Issei smiled as Female Kiba appeared in his room. Hello, Issei. Yumi said bashfully as she gazed at the young man. Issei smiled as he got up from his bed and put his switch on the desk. So what brings you here, Yumi? Issei smiled. He had a pretty good idea of what she was doing here, and it was the reason he didn't press things with Irina. Yumi blushed heavily before slowly stripping out of the female uniform of Kuoh Academy and looking at Issei. I need your help again, Yumi said bashfully. Irina Hyoudou was not a happy person as she arrived back at the Hyoudou household after a night of searching for a lead. The meeting with the devils in the area was a disaster, and if Issei hadn't sent his clone to watch them, things would have gotten even worse. Even when the real Issei returned, he was oddly silent. The fact they were unable to find any leads just made things worse. This sucks, Irina frowned as they arrived back at the Hyoudou house. Why are you being so stubborn about talking to your childhood friend? You said he was powerful and you were right. He could be a powerful ally considering what we're really up against, Zenovia said calmly. While she was angry about her defeat, Zenovia had to admit that Issei was powerful. Irina hated to admit it, but Zenovia was right. Issei's silence during dinner was very telling, and she was positive he sensed them leave. Alright Zenovia, you win. I'll talk to Issei. Irina said reluctantly as they opened the door using a spare key Issei's clone gave them earlier in the day. Making their way up to Issei's room, Irina opened the door and immediately regretted doing so because of what she saw. Her childhood friend was naked and having sex with the blonde knight that caused so much trouble earlier in the day. I'm coming, Issei, Yumi said happily. Here we go, Yumi. Issei smiled, pulling out of Yumi slightly, causing the two exorcists to gape at the massive size of his member. Huge, Zenovia said out loud, not expecting Issei to be so large. Well, the blonde knight didn't hear her words due to being distracted by Issei's release. The man in question did. Yes it is, but I doubt you came to talk about the size of my dick, didn't you? Issei chuckled as he pulled out of a dazed Yumi and turned towards the girls. Irina started to reply before Yumi interrupted. Issei can we Yumi started to say before she realized there was company and froze in shock. Take a break Yumi. This night just got a lot more interesting. Issei chuckled while Drake couldn't help but again wonder if his host planned this series of events. A now clothed Issei sat at his desk in a white shirt and brown shorts, while Yumi, Irina and Zenovia stood around his room. So where do we start? Issei chuckled since he had everyone right where he wanted them. What is your relationship with that devil? You aren't a devil yourself, but you're clearly sleeping with that particular one. Zenovia said bluntly, causing Irina and Yumi to blush. Would you have to say that with a straight face? Yumi exclaimed, a blush on her face. Irina was curious also, but before she could say anything Issei replied, my relationship with Yumi is very simple. She hired me as an assassin to help her with issues that the Grimoires get involved in. Issei said calmly. I see, and sex is your payment. Zenovia replied with quick understanding. That's right. Issei confirmed. Granted they had sex at the kendo club also, but they didn't need to know all of that. I see. So does that mean if we offer to have sex with you, you'll help us as well? Zenovia asked calmly as though it wasn't a big deal to the shock of the other occupants. Zenovia. Irina yelled out angrily, not expecting her partner to suggest your thing. What? We need his help Irina, and I'm sure you and him can work something out. Though I wouldn't be opposed to doing it myself if you don't want to. Zenovia said calmly. Irina was trapped and she knew it. If she said nothing, Zenovia was going to proposition Issei, and there was a very good chance he would approve. Granted she could do it herself, but Irina really wanted to keep things the way they promised as kids. Going for it, Irina looked at her childhood friend and said, Issei, we need your help also. Sure, but I'm going to listen to Yumi first, since she already made her payment. Issei smiled, deciding to make Irina sweat a little longer as punishment for hiding what was going on. Yumi smiled happily before looking at the nervous church girls. Apparently, a group of fallen angels and stray exorcists stole fragments of the holy sword Excalibur from the church and brought them to Kuoh. I want you to help me find those disgusting blades and destroy them. Yumi said with a vicious smile. Issei twitched heavily at the news since that was kind of a big deal. I assume you two want me to help you retrieve the blades for the church. Issei said flatly. That's right, Zenovia confirmed. Issei smiled since he could actually do both tasks at once instead of pitting the girls against one another. How about this? I'll help both of you at the same time. I'll help Irina and Zenovia retrieve the blades, and Yumi can destroy them. As long as you have the cores of the blades, restoring them should be a simple task. Issei smiled. That may be so, but what price do we have to pay Issei? Irina wondered nervously. Issei could theoretically ask for anything he wanted and she'd have no choice but to give in. Issei smiled as he walked over to Irina and cupped her face with his hand, causing her to blush heavily. Absolutely nothing. This is simply me helping out an old friend, Issei explained before walking back to his desk and sitting down with a smile. His explanation stunned Irina and Zenovia and annoyed Yumi. That's not fair, Yumi protested at the absurdity of the situation. As an assassin I'm entitled to my own price. Plus you're the one who offered your body to me in order for me to help you. Issei chuckled. Yumi couldn't protest that no matter how much she wanted to since Issei was right. She was the one who offered her body when it came to Riser, and the same thing was true just now. Fine. Yumi pouted. Irina smiled happily. A part of her was relieved that she didn't have to give up her virginity in this way, but another part of her was annoyed that it ended up being so simple. Zenovia was going to give her tons of grief for it later, and for that matter so was Issei. But now if you don't mind I'd like to get some sleep. It's been a long day and I could use some rest, Issei chuckled. Right, Irina said bashfully as she left the room with a curious Zenovia behind her. See you tomorrow, Issei. Yumi frowned before grabbing her clothes and leaving via magic circle. What a night, Issei chuckled as he relaxed into his bed. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, a lone female figure opened the door to Issei's room. Quickly walking inside, the figure made their way towards Issei's bed to find that he was still asleep. Good, he's asleep. The figure whispered as they slid off their pajamas and crawled into the bed, pressing her body against Issei's firm frame, but refusing to look him in the face. The person was wearing a low-cut bra and simple panty set, but you couldn't tell much more outside of that, thanks to the lack of light. Irina, I've missed you, Issei moaned in his sleep, catching the figure off guard when Issei pulled her on top of his body, pressing her against him. What are you MMPH, the figure started to say before her lips were silenced by Issei's, much to her shock. Despite being asleep, Issei still managed to slide his tongue into the figure's mouth and overwhelm her with a stunning amount of passion. Issei pulled away after a minute and the figure was able to catch her breath briefly. Unfortunately for the dazed figure, Issei wasn't done and reached around her body to grope her large breasts. Not like this. You can't, the figure moaned as Issei began teasing her breasts using a skill touch that was almost shocking. This is incredible. How can he be this good while asleep? The figure moaned as Issei skillfully played with her breasts using only his hands. If you looked closely you could tell that the figure's panties were getting stained and her nipples were getting harder. Your breasts have gotten so big, Irina. I wonder how you are down there, Issei mumbled as he began to reach for her lower half, which shocked the person even more. Issei, wait. You promised you'd wait until you beat me in a battle. The figure protested, hoping to somehow reach Issei in his tired state. Fortunately for her, the words caused Issei to stop his ministrations just as his right hand was arriving at her panties. Fine, Issei groaned before pulling his hands off of the figure's body. The figure used the opening to quickly get to her clothes, get dressed and leave, trying to ignore the craziness that just happened. Unlike with the bedroom, the hallway lights shone on the figure, revealing that it was Zenovia Kuoh who came to visit Issei, and she was blushing heavily, dressed in a pair of purple pajamas lent to her by Issei's mother. That was incredible. I can't believe that he was asleep that whole time. Zenovia thought to herself as she walked back to her room. She was curious what it was about Issei that made the devil so willing to give herself up to him, and why Irina swore by him, despite not seeing him for years. If that was just a taste of what he could do, she understood why the devil from before was so addicted to him. If not for the fact Irina told her about her promise with Issei, she was convinced that she would have spent the next few hours screaming his name as he took her purity. What Zenovia wasn't aware of was that Issei was actually well aware of what was going on and simply feigned sleep in order to have fun with the swordswoman without her realizing anything else. Issei would be lying if he said he wasn't hoping that it was Irina who came to visit and he could really have some fun, but Zenovia was good enough for now. Later that morning, a smiling Issei made his way down to breakfast, ready to cause more mischief. His little tryst with Zenovia would remain a secret for the moment, but he would certainly take his time to tease the blue-haired girl. Fortunately for him, the two girls were sitting down at the table, each with some coffee and dressed in their church gear. From what he could tell, his mother was in the kitchen for the moment and making some breakfast for the group. Good morning, Issei, Irina said with a smile on her face. Good morning, Irina, Issei replied before walking over to his childhood friend and planting a quick kiss on her lips, causing Irina and Zenovia to each blush for different reasons. What was that for, Issei? Irina said with a slight blush. I wanted to show my childhood friend a little love since I won't see you until I'm done school. Issei smiled. He also wanted to tease Zenovia, but he couldn't just say that out loud. Alright, but you and I really do need to spend some time together before my vacation is over. Irina said calmly. How about after I get done with class? I can meet up with you in the old park after school, and so she doesn't feel left out you can bring Zenovia. Issei replied. Sounds good to me. What about you, Zenovia? Irina smiled. That's fine, Zenovia said hastily, much to Irina's surprise and Issei's amusement. However, the biggest surprise came when Issei's mother walked in with a smile on her face and a large plate of pancakes for the group to enjoy. You can stop pretending, kids. I'm well aware that you girls are doing something for the church and that Issei is helping you, Issei Hyoudou said calmly. How did you know? Zenovia said in shock. Issei knowing about the supernatural wasn't a shock since he was the Red Dragon Emperor, but the mother was a different story. Irina's father told our whole family about the supernatural, not just Issei. Honestly, the moment Issei said Irina was coming, my first call was to Tauji. I'm surprised you girls didn't question how I had such perfect fitting pajamas the day you girls arrived. Issei Hyoudou chuckled. Good point, Zenovia sweat dropped. Admittedly, she did find it strange how the clothes fit her so perfectly, but she didn't think too much about it. Issei found the whole thing amusing and simply sat down for breakfast. That also explained why Irina had his cell number instead of calling the house, so yeah. I'm helping Irina and Zenovia with their mission this afternoon. Hopefully nothing stupid happens, but you never know. Issei said bluntly. Be safe, you three. Issei's mom said calmly, and after that the group enjoyed breakfast before Issei had to go to school. Irina and Zenovia arrived at the orc dressed in their usual garb and ready for the mission, but when they arrived, they noticed that there were two notable absences from the group. Lady Gremory, where are Issei and your knight Yumi? Irina said with a frown on her face. Rias looked at the girl bashfully, trying to figure out how best to explain it. Kendo had no such trouble. Yufufufu, Issei is at the Kendo club having sex with some of the members and Yumi with him. Huh? Irina exclaimed as a massive blush formed on her face. She knew Issei was having sex with Yumi, but the fact that he was sleeping with a whole club of women was certainly newsworthy. Yufufufu, I can't explain it how it happened, but Issei has a swordswoman fetish. Before he seduced Yumi, he seduced the members of our school's Kendo club, and he constantly fucks them after school. Yumi discovered that and got roped into it as well. Kendo teased. When Issei asked to become the manager of the Kendo club, it caused rumors to spread all over the school, and naturally Kendo got curious. It was a simple task to find a club member and get her to spill the beans. I see Irina sweat drop since she was the cause of said fetish when they were kids. She never imagined that it would manifest itself like this though. Rias was annoyed that Akeno knew that, but stayed calm in order to keep the peace. Since we have a little while, why don't you relax? I can even introduce my peerage to you properly, Rias suggested. Knowing their strengths would make the most sense. Sure, Irina smiled, making a mental note to figure out why her partner was blushing as Issei's sexual prowess was explained. It took another hour before Issei and Yumi finally arrived, and Issei was smiling calmly, but Yumi looked exhausted. Sorry we were late. Things at the kendo club took longer than I expected, Issei said calmly. Had enough fun for one day? Akeno teased, knowing exactly what Issei was up to. For one day, no, but I did promise Irina I would come today. The kendo girls were not happy with me, but I made it up to them, Issei said with a lustful grin that caused blushes to appear on Yumi, Irina, Zenovia and Akeno's faces. Alright, Rias replied calmly, managing to hide her blush. Since we're working together, how about we split up and look for more leads? That's fine, so how do you want to split the groups? Issei pointed out. They had enough firepower to split up without too much trouble. Lady Rias, why don't you, Akeno and Asia stay behind and wait for us? Issei, Yumi, and I will make up the first search group, and Zenovia, Carloman and Kaneko will make the second. Irina smiled. That's fine with me, Rias smiled, since Akeno and Asia had obvious issues with the Fallen and they needed some people to stay behind. Works for me also. Issei shrugged. He had a very good idea of why Irina paired the two of them together, but a part of him was more interested in the Zenovia Carloman group. Zenovia, Carloman and Kaneko. The trio of Zenovia, Carloman and Kaneko was an unusual one, to be sure. Thanks to the experience she gained from being in Riser's peerage, Carloman was used to exorcists and how to fight them. Kaneko's sense of smell would help, particularly since she met Fried before. As for Zenovia, her fragment of the blade was Excalibur destruction, which meant that she was a force to be reckoned with. However, none of that mattered right now. That lucky bitch Yumi, she gets to spend all that time with Issei, and now she's teamed up with him again. I bet they're all screwing each other as we speak. Carloman pouted. Irina is going to focus on the mission. Zenovia replied calmly. Zenovia didn't quite understand Irina's reluctance to sleep with her childhood friend, particularly after experiencing Issei's touch herself, but Irina was annoyingly stubborn in regards to things like that. I doubt it. Her reactions were very interesting when she realized that Issei was sleeping with Yumi, and for that matter so were yours. Carloman smiled. What do you mean by that? Zenovia protested, though a blush began to form on her face. You have that look of somebody who's interested in sex but never found somebody who was worthy of your body. Carloman smiled. How? Zenovia replied in shock that this person had her figured out so easily. Don't worry about how I know, but know this. If you want to truly experience being a woman, ask Issei. Believe me when I say you won't regret it. Carloman smiled. I see. Zenovia blushed as she thought about what happened the night before and the revelation that both knights of the Gremory household were sleeping with Issei. So Issei, what do you think we should do now? Irina wondered as the trio walked around. The grouping was an awkward one to say the least, but Irina felt this was easier than dealing with the other knight of the Gremory peerage. The look of annoyance on Carloman's face was one she knew very well, and she suspected that the other knight was enjoying Issei just as Yumi, but not as frequently. That's easy. We find that Fried guy that attacked Yumi. He's working for whoever attacked her and he can lead us to them. Issei said calmly. Works for me. I want to get my revenge, Yumi said angrily. Sorry, but no revenge for you, Yumi. I will fight Fried while you and Irina back me up. You had your chance, Yumi, and you failed. I will face him and get the information we need. Issei said firmly. But Issei, Yumi protested before Issei walked over to the knight and started blatantly fondling her breasts, much to the embarrassment of both girls. Yumi, have you forgotten how in your first battle you were so irrational because of the Excalibur that Carloman had to bail you out? Issei reminded her. Yes, but Yumi moaned. But nothing, Yumi. Your brother sacrificed his life so you could live a normal life and be a normal person. By acting so reckless you basically spit on his sacrifice. Issei lectured, keeping his hands on her breasts, much to the embarrassment of both girls. Okay, Yumi replied, trying to stay calm despite what Issei was doing. But Issei smiled before taking his hands off of the flustered knight. So Issei, how strong are you now? Irina wondered, wanting Issei to focus on her for a little bit. Strong enough to know that if Fried is the best that this Valper guy has to offer, then I can probably do all of this on my own. Issei smiled, but his smile quickly faded when he noticed the nervous look on Irina's face. What are you hiding, Irie? Issei said with a twitch, knowing that he was about to get extremely annoyed. Well. Irina said bashfully, knowing that it was time to tell the whole truth and pray that Issei didn't go ballistic. Although Rias stayed behind, she was still doing her best to think about how best to help her peerage with the current hunt. She recalled that Yumi was attacked by the same rogue priest that was working with the fallen angels, and she got a bad feeling in the back of her mind. Hey Asia, what do you remember about working with Fried? Rias wondered. Something about this whole situation bothered her more than she cared to admit. He was a violent man who seemed to be more interested in killing than helping people, but you knew that. He didn't trust Lady Raynor at all either, Asia said bashfully. I was afraid of that. Rias groaned as the bad feeling she was having resurfaced. What's wrong, Akeno said, nervously aware that Rias realized something troublesome. Freed never struck me as the type who would take orders from Raynor. Somebody else was behind him being there. Rias explained. I see, and you think that he's working for that person again. Akeno said calmly with a sharpened gaze. That's right. Stealing from a church requires powerful resources and not ones that a disgraced scientist would have. Rias explained. She was well aware that the person behind the Holy Sword project was involved, but he wasn't the only one. All of a sudden 2 magic circles appeared in the room out of nowhere. The first one contained Carloman, Zenovia and Kaneko, but when only Yumi appeared from the second one, Rias realized something was wrong. Yufufufu, this time it's Irina missing, how kinky, Akeno said calmly. Sex is the last thing on Issei's mind. Yumi said coldly, catching the group off guard. And why do you say that, Yumi? Rias said with a raised eyebrow. Tell them, Zenovia. Yumi said angrily, clearly holding back her rage. Because Irina told him that the person behind this incident was Cocabiel. Zenovia spoke up, aware of how much trouble that she was already in. The girls ultimately decided to search for the exorcist Freed, since he would be the best lead, but all of a sudden a clone of Issei appeared in front of them. The look of fury on his face was enough to tell her that Irina had squealed, and when he then told her group to return to the orc, she knew the jig was up. What? Rias said angrily, her rage slowly rising at the revelation. Zenovia took a big breath before continuing. The church suspected that Cocabiel was behind the robberies because one of the people killed was one of his top agents. Irina didn't want to say anything to you guys because she knew word would get back to Issei and she didn't want him to worry. Zenovia explained. Rias was furious at the girl for being so reckless. A rogue exorcist and priest were one thing, but a cadre was a complete other. In fact, knowing that he was involved changed how they would act as well. So what do you intend to do? Rias questioned. I obviously intend to complete my mission regardless of the danger. Zenovia said firmly. I see, and what about your partner? Rias wondered. I'm sure that Irina is the same. After all, she was determined to complete the mission without getting the red dragon involved, Zenovia said calmly. I see, Rias replied, wondering what Issei and Irina were up to and when would they return. Hi do household. Irina sat on Issei's bed nervously as she waited for her childhood friend to speak. When she told him about Cocabiel, she knew Issei would be angry, and when he teleported her back to his house, she wondered what Issei would do. Strip Irina, Issei said coldly. How? Irina exclaimed with a blush on her face. Strip for me right now, Irina. When I thought I was helping a friend, I made you pay no price. I've changed my mind, Issei said firmly. I see, Irina replied calmly as she got up and stood at the front of Issei's bed. With a blush still on her face, she slowly slid off the battle suit she was wearing, revealing a pink half bra that hid her nipples, but not much more, and matching pink panties. With a blush on her face, she unhooked the bra, allowing her breasts to flow freely, but as she reached for her panties, Issei spoke up. That's quite enough, Irina. Issei replied as he walked behind his childhood friend with a lustful smile on his face. Issei. Irina gasped as Issei bent her over the bed with her rear hanging off and her breasts pressed against the bed. It was an erotic position, and Irina couldn't help but wonder what he would do next. You were a bad girl, Irina Shido. Now it's time to punish you. Issei smiled as his hand flew back and connected with Irina's rear. Irina yelped, not expecting a spanking as her punishment, but grateful that Issei was still willing to keep to their agreement. I'll forgive you for hiding this from me, Irina, and you should consider yourself lucky that I've already agreed to help Yumi. However, I will get my pound of flesh from you for lying. Issei smiled as he continued to spank Irina on the rear. I'm sorry, Irina yelped once again. The spanking continued as Issei pummeled Irina's rear with his hand. The worst part for the exorcist was that the pain had faded and now she was starting to feel some perverse pleasure from the act, something Issei noticed. It seems this is no longer a punishment, Irina. Issei smiled as he stopped his spanking, noticing the wet spot starting to form on Irina's panties. The chestnut-haired girl was about to encourage Issei to actually act on the desires he no doubt had for her before he spoke again. We should return to the orc. I'm pretty sure Rias will want to discuss how to handle things now that a cadre is involved. Issei smiled. Realizing that Issei wasn't going to go further, she turned back towards her childhood friend with a solemn look on her face. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for not telling you, Issei, Irina said calmly before she got off the bed and slid her outfit back on her frame. Now that the truth was out, it was time to discuss what to do next. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.